Okay, so in this lesson, I'm going to go over tiny homes and cooperative housing. So we'll look at some of the aspects of what defines cooperative housing, some of the benefits of cooperative housing, and then look at this sort of burgeoning tiny home movement and what that all means, and think about like some of the implications of each of those. So cooperative housing it's a really old idea. I mean, people have been living in cooperative units for thousands of years. It used to be for protection, and now we've just again, it's another one of those things, kind of like the passive solar design. Like we've gotten away from it to a large extent. But there's sort of a modern, relatively modern, let's say 40, 50 years anyway, movement toward cooperative housing. I mean, you can think of like the 60s and 70s with the sort of commune era. That was, I would say, the beginning of the new cooperative movement. But this is not a commune. This is cooperative housing. So people enter into these agreements, very democratically managed, and there are many different kinds of cooperative housing units. They all What defines them as cooperative is that they are um, they're co-managed. Okay, they're democratically managed. All right, so co-owned, co-managed by a group of people. There are all kinds of different models. Sometimes you do own it. Sometimes you're kind of like a renter in a way, but you are still part of the management of the building. Okay, and so they get away from this very individualized model of like it's my house, it's my stuff, it's my lease. Everything's mine, everything's individualized. Most of these focus on sort of more group community-based living, which minimize individual ownership of a lot of things, right? So if you live with five families or five roommates, and you share one dishwasher, one clothes washer, right? Um, One porch, one kitchen, one batch of cooking equipment. All of that cuts back on resource use, and so by pretty much naturally just reduces your resource use because you end up, sharing resources more than you would otherwise. Um, some of them have really, really strict rules. Most usually there's really strict rules that are laid down by the cooperative body, which is managed democratically by everyone in the cooperative. Okay, so they usually have like elections. Well, they have a president, a vice president, a secretary, all that sort of stuff. So they have positions, but everybody has the opportunity to participate, and everyone is expected to participate. And the group usually comes up with often fairly strict rules, and I'll go over some examples of that in a minute. But um, the point is that there's all manner of cooperative models out there. The key aspect is that they're really co-owned and co-managed by a group of people together. So it gets away from this very individualized housing model. And let's watch this short video about cooperative housing. So that's a pretty good introductory video. As you can see, there's all kinds of different co-op models out there, but they're cooperatively run, cooperatively managed, usually cooperatively owned as well. But social interaction is a key part of. Sorry. So there was a reading with an example of cooperative housing. This is actually in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where the University of Michigan is. And apparently they have a pretty robust cooperative scene up there. So there's this inner cooperative council that oversees a whole bunch of housing co-ops in the city of Ann Arbor. This is just one example from someone that ran a co-op or was the president of a co-op, the Nakamura Cooperative House. And this had 29 different people, so and they shared a lot of common spaces. Um, but as you saw in that video, um, it doesn't mean that you necessarily are like sharing a room with someone. So as it turns out, with this cooperative, there are some individual bedrooms, but sometimes you share as well. So again, it just sort of depends. In this house, they had seniority was the determining factor for whether or not you got a single or your first choice for a single room. But this I thought was interesting. Everyone pitched in, so they have kind of a chore list, and there's expectations to do chores. And if you don't actually do your chores for the week, if you don't have a viable reason, there can be some penalties. Like you can lose your cooperative privileges if you don't pitch in. So that's actually a very common way to run a cooperative, that everyone is required to do a certain amount of like pitching in and helping out around. So this is totally self-governed. They have a president, secretary, treasurer, and so forth. Um, and just seemed like a really good way. Is a much less expensive way to live, and especially in a town where housing, because of the college, is expensive. This is an example of Kalkbright. I put a little bit of reading in this week's lesson about this. This is a place I've actually taken students to Switzerland a couple of times, and we visited Kalkbright every time. Really amazing. It's basically a whole city block, and this is an overview of the whole complex. So this is in downtown Zurich, which is in the top like two or three most expensive places to live in the world, and it's much more affordable. So the government actually subsidizes, so it's cheaper here to live, and the waiting list is like years long to get in these things. But you can see all of this whole entire thing, this whole complex is cooperatively owned and managed. And so there are some individual places. This is one of the group apartments here. So there's a lot of shared spaces. Um, One interesting thing about Kalkbright, and you can see it has this kind of like nice rooftop garden type of thing, a playground for the kids and all that. Um, and so this is really interesting. There actually are multiple businesses in Kalkbright, or they have a space that they rent out to multiple businesses anyway, including a restaurant, like a travel agency, and a little store. And they're all co-owned along with the whole apartment complex. So this happens to be a really strict one. Sustainability is at the heart of Kalkbright. You're actually not allowed to own a car. That's part of the sort of covenant to live there, unless you need it for work. Also, Zurich is well known for their public transportation. Switzerland in general is known for their public transportation. It's a very, very bike-friendly city. As you can see, it would just crack me up. We went down to see the bike area, and normally, you go to like an apartment building, and you'll see, I don't know, whatever, 10, 20 bikes maybe in a regular apartment building, and it was just literally as far as the eye could see, it's just bicycles. Real organized, so they have like an elevator system because people, they're not allowed to own cars. Um, you're not allowed to own an individual washing machine, so there's like a laundromat type of thing down on the first floor that everyone can use. They actually have very little control over their own heating and cooling. They have like a little bit of wiggle room, but they can't just like crank the heat or crank the air conditioning. In fact, I don't believe there was any air conditioning, which is relatively common in Switzerland. This wall I thought was really interesting. So this is actually it, it's like it's kind of a skill share wall. Skill share, like I have a skill and I post on here and I say, look, uh, you know, for me, I would post like I understand how if you have someone that needs help with upgrading the insulation or air sealing in the house or doing an energy analysis, maybe doing some data analysis. I would put it on the wall and said, hey, if anybody needs this, I need help with this. So let's say I have a dog that I need walked when I'm at work, and someone posts that they can walk a dog during the day, and I'm like, well, I can help you, analyze your utility bills, and then that's sort of an exchange to get away from the sort of like we're always paying money and being uh, limited by our income. And one of the intents of this wall, and this is pretty common in cooperative living, is that everybody has valuable skills and everybody can contribute. Everybody has enough worth that like your time is just as valuable as my time. And we'll talk about this a little bit later when we look at the transition town model. But anyway, I thought that was really interesting. It's just public posting, and then you just sort of mix and match. Here's another little rooftop garden. They actually grow some vegetables up there, and they have some solar panels and so forth. Um, this is another cooperative housing complex. Now this is Maris Alvonen, excuse me, Maris Alvonen, which means more than housing. So this whole thing is cooperatively owned. Okay, so this is multiple buildings. Again, this is in Zurich. Uh, Again, sustainability is a key focus. They have this kind of like living wall, which I thought was really cool. Definitely, architects had fun with this one. With you can see all these like interesting touches. This is a stairwell in there. This is one of the public or one of the apartments. And I can't remember how many people lived in here, maybe six. And they each had their own room, but then they all shared the kitchen and living room and so forth. So it really cuts back on your square footage needed for your living. All right, so if really my only own personal space is my bedroom, which maybe 20 by 10, right? And then instead of having like my family, right? Like we have a kitchen, we have a basement, we have a backyard, we have a deck, and that's all just for four people. Instead of that, if you share all of that and really your own private space is your own room, you really cut back on your resource use, right? So your energy use is less, the waste you create is less. You can buy less stuff, right? You have less places to put things, so that cuts back on your consumption. So there's all kinds of really interesting benefits of this. And there are cooperative housing units all over the United States. I know of at least one in Philadelphia nearby. I'm sure there are others, but this is a model that's out there. So if this is something you think you might be interested in, or if you move to a new city someday and you're like, I don't know anyone, I really like, to find a way to get to know people, and you're all sustainability minded at this point, so you can find some sort of like-minded people, live in a cooperative for a little while, make some friends, and it's a good way to sort of serve a lot of purposes at once. Okay, so that's your basic cooperative housing. The last thing I'm going to touch on here is tiny homes. This is something that's been become more and more popular. There's a multiple TV shows now on tiny homes. Actually, there's movies. So this is something that's becoming more widely recognized. It was very, very niche, like say mid aughts, like 2005, 2006, and it's just become a lot more common to the point that there's tiny home builders and there's net zero tiny homes all over the place. The key with tiny home, it's just a small house, right? So the idea is the motivations are different. For most people, they want to simplify their lifestyle, and housing is just so incredibly expensive. You can buy a top-notch tiny home like this, probably is going to be under 100,000, and that's like an expensive one. Um, that has like a lot of sort of sustainable flourishes on it, and really nice. But you can find these for 50, 60, $70,000, where you can't find, you can't build a home for less than a couple 100,000. And so the other nice thing is that pretty much all these tiny homes are on wheels. And in addition to that, allowing you to be mobile, right? So you can move your house with the season or wherever, you can go where it's warm or cold, wherever you're into. But another nice thing is it lessens some of the sort of like code implications if you don't have a foundation. So if you don't have a foundation, you don't have to have a permit to build it. Like I could build one of these in my backyard because it's on wheels. I don't have to get a permit. If I build anything that has a foundation, has a concrete foundation, I have to get a permit, and there's a lot more hoops to jump through. So that is a benefit, and they're usually designed to be towed behind something that's capable, a truck or even just an SUV, something like that, Subaru. Um, and so, you can see with a smaller house, you're going to have less stuff, you're going to use less energy, you're more likely to spend some time outside, so they're sort of like connecting to nature more likely. It just sort of simplifies your life, which I think a lot of people have come around to, we tend to sort of complicate things, and we have too much stuff, and it sort of takes a lot of time and effort and energy to maintain, and this is sort of simplifying things. But also because they're so inexpensive, there are all these really interesting applications. Like there's a tiny home, there's a church in Dover, Delaware, that's building a small neighborhood of tiny homes for the homeless. There was that video that was posted. There's the tiny home village in Colorado for homeless people. So there's all kinds of really interesting things that you can do with this. And I just want to show you, I've actually visited, this is a tiny home builder out in Lyons, Colorado, which is right outside of Boulder. So we have this little place called Simplicity Homes, just a private little builder, and guy just has a really interesting story. But just I just wanted to see, this is a tiny home. I think this model is like 60, $70,000, right? And they look small, but if you go inside, like it's not that bad. I mean, there were like 14 or 15 of us in there, and it wasn't that crowded, really. I mean, so you can see it's pretty spacious, and he builds them really tall, so it gives you that feeling of space, and it really makes a difference. Even though it's not very wide, it does feel fairly spacious. A lot of them have lofts, like this is Byron, the guy that builds the houses, and so they maximize their space. And if you find any tiny home building, videos out there or documentaries or whatever, you'll see they maximize their space. Like the bed folds down into the kitchen table, and or can be used as a desk. I mean, there's multi-functional purposes for a lot of things. But you can see, I mean, you can have quite a few people in here without feeling really super crowded. And you can see all this natural light, all this natural wood is really nice. I thought this was interesting. He called it size appropriate living, and this one's only 340 square feet, so not very big at all. And this is one that's under construction, and I just wanted to show you that for this particular builder, his focus is really on making it as sustainable as possible. So that's super duper insulation everywhere. So really tight building, really good insulation. You can integrate those passive solar principles in here. You can face it south with the windows, and you can have the overhangs. And so again, you can see like you can see what 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. There's 11 people in here, and there's more than enough space. Okay, so you might not want to have a giant family in there, but certainly for a small family, it's totally fine. Now, if you think of I just want you to think about some of the sustainability implications of cooperative housing and tiny homes. You think about the building materials, energy use, water use. So anytime we can have more people per square foot, we're going to reduce all of these things. Okay, you're going to save money. We're going to reduce impact on the environment. Most of these have healthier indoor air quality. Um, by using less resources, there's actually an equity component to that because we save more resources for others. Um, by reducing our demand on resources, that reduces the cost of resources, saves more for others, make them cheaper for others, more likely to make a cleaner environment, more accessible. All of these because they're going to limit our per capita emissions because we're putting more people into the same amount of space. All of that, if you think anything that impacts climate change positively, reduces climate change, is going to address equity because with climate change, it's always the marginalized that are most impacted. And also just more affordable for people. Okay. So, all right. So that's it for the tiny home and cooperative housing discussion, and that wraps it up for this lesson.